It started like any ordinary Saturday. Sunlight bouncing off the glass walls of Westbrook Mall, laughter echoing from the food court, sneakers squeaking on polished floors. But within minutes, that sound would turn into screams. A 16-year-old boy, tall, quiet, wearing a gray hoodie and clutching a shopping bag, walked out of the mall doors. He wasn't running. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't stealing. He was just walking when 3 police cruisers screeched to a stop in front of him. Shoppers froze. Sirens cut through the air like knives. The boy didn't understand what was happening. 1 second, he was texting his mom to say he'd be home in 15 minutes. The next, he was staring down the barrels of guns, officers shouting orders that blurred into noise. Hands up! Get on the ground! Now! He dropped his bag. His phone hit the concrete. His voice trembled as he tried to speak, but the words never made it past his throat. Within seconds, 2 officers tackled him to the ground. No one helped. People recorded. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed louder than the sirens. Someone in the crowd whispered, "What did he do?" Another voice said, "He looks like the guy from the robbery alert." But the truth, the one no one cared to ask, was that he didn't look like anyone except himself. Then, something unexpected happened. Before the officers could drag him toward the car, black SUVs rolled in, fast, silent, unmarked. The crowd's murmurs turned to confusion as 10 men in dark suits stepped out. Their jackets revealed flashes of FBI badges. The officers froze. The same hands that had just shoved a teenager to the ground now trembled slightly. One of the agents looked directly at them and said something no one could hear. But whatever it was, it changed everything. Moments later, the cuffs came off. The boy was lifted to his feet, still shaking, still silent, still trying to understand how an afternoon trip to buy sneakers had turned into a nightmare. Phones kept recording. The crowd kept guessing. But no one knew the full story. Not yet, because what the FBI discovered that day would expose something far bigger than a mistaken arrest. It would uncover a system built to protect some and punish others, even before the truth had a chance to breathe. And the question that would haunt everyone who watched that video wasn't what happened that day. It was something far darker. Why did it take 10 federal agents to stop 3 local cops from destroying 1 innocent life? Before that day outside Westbrook Mall, Marcus Bell was just another teenager trying to stay invisible. 17 years old, a senior at Lincoln High, with dreams bigger than his small corner of South Carolina. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was a quiet one, the one teachers described as polite but distant. His mother, Denise, worked double shift as a nurse, often coming home with tired eyes but an unbroken spirit. His father had been gone for years, not by choice, but by consequence. A minor traffic stop had spiraled into a charge that never made sense, and by the time Marcus turned 10, prison visits had replaced bedtime stories. That's when Marcus learned something most kids his age didn't have to, that in his world, innocence wasn't protection. Still, he tried. He kept his grades up, played basketball, stayed off the streets. Every morning, he'd lace up his worn-out Nikes, tuck in his earbuds, and remind himself that if he could just make it to graduation, things might finally change. The Friday before the incident, Marcus had gotten his first paycheck from his part-time job at a local hardware store. He wanted to spend a little of it, not on anything big, just a pair of sneakers he'd been eyeing for months. A small reward for doing everything right in a world that often told him he'd fail anyway. His mom had smiled when he told her, "You deserve something good. Baby, just be careful. Stay out of trouble." He promised he would. Saturday morning came like any other. The sky was clear, the air thick with a kind of humidity that clings to southern summers. Marcus caught the 11 a.m. bus downtown, earbuds in, music low. He passed familiar faces, people who nodded, smiled, or looked away. At the mall, he walked straight to the shoe store. The clerk, a kid from his school, recognized him. They joked about basketball tryouts, about how Marcus could dunk if he wasn't always so tired from work. For a moment, life felt simple again. When Marcus stepped out of the store, his phone buzzed, a text from his mom. "Don't forget to grab lunch before you come home. Love you." He smiled and typed back, "Love you too." That's when everything started to shift. Across the parking lot, 2 police cruisers idled, engines running. He didn't think much of it until he noticed the way one of the officers was looking at him. Not with suspicion, with decision. It was subtle at first, the way they stepped out, hands already near their belts. The way their radios crackled quietly as they whispered something he couldn't hear. Marcus felt that familiar unease creep up his spine. He'd been taught what to do in moments like this. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden moves. Speak calmly. Obey every command. But what no one ever taught him was how to stop fear from showing on his face. As he crossed the parking lot, he saw something flicker across one officer's phone. A photo, a blurred still from what looked like security footage. The caption read, "Suspect, male, black hoodie, possibly armed." Marcus's hoodie was gray. His hands were empty, but none of that mattered. Somewhere, a decision had already been made. Inside the mall, people went on with their day, unaware that outside, a small misunderstanding was about to spiral into something the whole country would talk about. For Marcus, it started as a chill, that gut-deep instinct that told him something's wrong. He slowed his steps, debating whether to turn back, whether to call his mom. But before he could decide, he heard it, the sirens, close and sharp. He looked up just in time to see 3 cruisers pulling in from different directions, boxing him in. And in that split second, Marcus understood what his father meant the last time they spoke through a prison phone. Sometimes, son, doing everything right still won't save you. He hadn't understood it then, but he was about to. The crowd that gathered didn't see Marcus's dreams or his fear. They saw a headline in motion, a narrative that wrote itself before he could open his mouth. He wanted to shout that he hadn't done anything, that he was just a kid buying shoes, that he was supposed to start basketball practice next week. But his voice stayed locked somewhere between panic and disbelief. And just as the officers closed in, someone in the crowd muttered, "Isn't that the kid from the alert?" That one sentence sealed it. Moments later, the tackle, the cuffs, the chaos, everything that came next would become part of a viral video, replayed millions of times by people who didn't know him, didn't know his mother, didn't know his story. But what they didn't see was this. Behind the fear in Marcus's eyes was something else, something that refused to break. Because even as the asphalt scraped his skin and the weight of the world pressed down on his back, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting not to disappear, like his father, like so many others who never got the chance to explain. And somewhere, beyond the flashing lights and the shouting voices, fate was already shifting, because 10 black SUVs were cutting through traffic on their way to the scene. They weren't there for Marcus, but before the day was over, they would be there because of him. The moment Marcus hit the ground, everything slowed. He could taste the dust, feel the rough concrete scraping his cheek. His heartbeat drowned out every sound around him, the shouting, the sirens, the phones recording. 2 officers pressed their knees into his back, their weight crushing the air out of his lungs. He tried to speak, to say he couldn't breathe, but his word came out as gasps, sharp, broken, ignored. "Stop resisting," one shouted. But Marcus wasn't resisting. He was pleading. The mall security guard who'd watched the whole thing unfold whispered into his radio, unsure if he should intervene. He knew something felt wrong, but he'd seen this before, how quickly the story could twist. A woman nearby filmed with trembling hands. "He's just a kid," she murmured, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Marcus's phone buzzed inches from his face, his mom calling again. The screen lit up with her name, flashing like a heartbeat, but no one noticed. The officers finally pulled him to his feet, shoving him toward the police car. His hoodie was torn, his lip bleeding, his hands cuffed so tightly they'd leave marks for days. They never told him why. When he asked, his voice shaking, the older officer barked, "You match a suspect description. Keep quiet." That's all it took, a description. 6 words had erased his identity and replaced it with suspicion. By now, a crowd had gathered, phones raised, voices raised higher. Some shouted at the officers, others just watched, caught between outrage and fear. And then, through the noise, came the low growl of engines. Black SUVs, unmarked, dark-tinted, pulled into the parking lot like shadows slicing through sunlight. The officers turned, startled. The lead agent stepped out, tall, composed, voice calm but commanding. He flashed his badge. "FBI, step aside." The officers hesitated, eyes flickering between authority and confusion. One stammered, We have a suspect." "Not anymore," the agent interrupted. "You have a mistake." Those words cut through the air. Within moments, everything shifted. The officers' confidence faltered. The crowd's whispers grew louder, and Marcus, still trembling, watched as the impossible happened. The same men who had pinned him down now unlocking his cuffs. The FBI agent crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "You okay, son?" Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. But the real shock came next. The agent turned toward the officers. "This is the kid who called us. Here's a witness, not the suspect." The crowd gasped. Marcus blinked in disbelief. Witness? He remembered now. 2 weeks earlier, he had anonymously tipped off authorities about a gun-running ring that operated near his neighborhood. He hadn't told anyone, not even his mom, afraid it would put them in danger. He'd used a burner email, sent photos, and deleted everything. He thought it was over, but it wasn't. The ring had ties to local law enforcement, the same precinct that had just tackled him, and the FBI had been tracing the leak ever since. Now, the truth was standing in front of them, a terrified teenager, mistaken for a suspect, moment away from becoming a tragedy. As the agents led Marcus away from the chaos, his legs felt weak. He wasn't sure where they were going or who to trust. All he knew was that the same system that had once ignored him was now scrambling to claim him. They brought him to a nearby cafe, cleared it out, and sat him down with a bottle of water. The agent, his name was Walker, tried to reassure him, but Marcus's mind was spinning. "Why did they come after me?" he asked finally. Walker sighed. "Someone fed them your name. The tip you sent exposed people who didn't want to be found out." Marcus froze. His chest tightened. "So they knew?" Walker nodded grimly. "They knew, and they made sure someone else paid the price." That sentence hit harder than any tackle. He thought being silent would keep him safe. But silence had made him invisible, until now. Outside, reporters were starting to arrive. Videos of the arrest had already hit social media. Headlines screamed, "Black teen wrongly arrested outside mall, saved by FBI." But the truth wasn't so simple. The local officers were already writing their own version, that Marcus had resisted, that there was reasonable cause, that it was a misunderstanding. The kind of language that softens brutality until it sounds procedural. Inside the cafe, Marcus stared out the window, watching police lights reflect off the glass. He felt anger rising, sharp and cold, not just for what had happened to him, but for what could have happened if the FBI had arrived 5 minutes later. 5 minutes. That's all that separated his life from a statistic. Walker leaned forward. "You need to understand something. Son, what happened to you? It wasn't a coincidence. It's part of a bigger pattern." Marcus met his eyes. "So what now?" The agent hesitated. "Now, we protect you, but we'll need your help to finish what you started." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked down at his bruised wrists, at the faint red lines cutting into his skin. Every mark told a story, not of weakness, but survival. And in that moment, something changed inside him. He wasn't going to be silent anymore, because if they could twist his truth once, they could do it to anyone. Walker's radio crackled. A voice came through, urgent. "We've got movement. Someone's leaking footage from the station. It's spreading." Marcus glanced up. "What footage?" The agent's face hardened. "The officers' body cams. Someone's trying to erase them." Marcus's stomach dropped. Walker stood abruptly. "We need to move. Now." Outside, flashing lights painted the parking lot red and blue. Reporters shouted questions, cameras rolled, and somewhere in the crowd, unseen, a figure watched from the shadows, phone in hand. He wasn't there to film. He was there to finish what had started. And as Marcus stepped into the SUV, heart pounding, one thought echoed louder than all the noise around him. They tried to silence the wrong kid. The ride to the field office was silent, too silent. Marcus sat in the back seat of the FBI sub, watching the city blur by in streaks of red and blue. Every passing siren made him flinch. Every glance from passing drivers felt like judgment. Agent Walker sat beside him, Phone pressed to his ear, voice tight. Yes, we've got him. No, he's not a suspect. He's a witness. Marcus stared down at his hands, the faint bruises on his wrists, the cuts on his knuckles. They weren't just marks anymore. They were proof of what it took just to exist. When they arrived at the station, chaos had already broken loose. Reporters crowded outside the barricades, microphones flashing like weapons. Inside, officers barked orders, papers shuffled, radios screamed. Something was wrong. Walker pushed through the doors. "Where's the footage?" he demanded. A younger agent hurried over. "It's gone, sir. The internal server's been wiped. Every body cam, every dash cam, deleted." Walker froze. All of it. All of it. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He stepped closer. "So, there's nothing? No proof?" Walker didn't answer. His jaw tightened. "They are covering it up." In that instant, Marcus realized the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to. The same officers who had slammed him to the ground were now behind closed doors, rewriting the story, reshaping reality. And they'd get away with it, unless someone stopped them. But before Walker could respond, an explosion of noise erupted outside. Protesters had gathered, hundreds of them, holding signs, shouting Marcus's name. Justice for Marcus. Stop the lies. Enough is enough. The viral video had spread faster than anyone expected. Millions had seen it. Millions had questions. And someone wanted those questions silenced. Walker's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and swore under his breath. "We've got a breach." "Breach?" Marcus asked, fear creeping into his voice. Walker's tone was low. "A car's heading this way. Same SUV used in the gun-running ring. They know you're here." Before Marcus could react, the glass windows at the front of the building shattered. Screams filled the room. Agents drew their weapons, shouting commands. "Get down!" Marcus stood behind the desk, heart pounding, ears ringing. The chaos was deafening, boots stomping, radios crackling, bullets embedding in the walls. This wasn't a random attack. This was a message. Walker pulled Marcus by the arm. "Come on, we have to move." They sprinted down a hallway, sirens wailing through the building. Behind them, smoke filled the air, gray, choking, relentless. They reached the parking garage. Walker shoved a set of keys into Marcus's hand. "Get in the back seat and stay low." Marcus's voice shook. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." But safety wasn't a word Marcus believed in anymore. As they pulled out, the city felt darker than before. Helicopters hovered overhead, streets blocked by flashing lights. Through the window, Marcus saw people holding his face on posters, strangers fighting for a boy they didn't know, whose story had become their rallying cry. For a brief moment, he felt something new. Not fear, not anger, but responsibility. His pain had become public. His silence had become a voice for thousands who never got to speak. But just as the thought settled, headlights blazed in the rearview mirror. A black SUV, the same kind that had attacked the field office, was tailing them. Fast! Walker hit the accelerator. "Hold on." Marcus gripped the seat as the car swerved through traffic. The SUV behind them didn't slow. It rammed their bumper once, twice. "Why are they doing this?" Marcus shouted. Walker's voice was strained. "Because you saw something you weren't supposed to." Marcus's mind flashed back to the photos he'd sent weeks ago. Crates marked with police tags, guns meant for evidence but never logged. Proof that officers were selling weapons to gangs. He hadn't realized the depth of what he'd exposed. Until now. The SUV slammed into them again, harder this time. Their car spun, tires screeching against asphalt. The world tilted. For a second, everything went white. Sound, sight, thought, gone. When Marcus opened his eyes, he was upside down. The car had flipped. Smoke poured from the hood. Walker was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. Marcus coughed, unbuckled his seatbelt, crawled through shattered glass. His hands burned, knees bleeding, lungs on fire. Outside, the SUV stopped. Two men stepped out, faces hidden, movement sharp, deliberate. Marcus ducked behind the wreckage. His heart raced so fast it hurt. He could hear their footsteps, slow, heavy, certain. He reached for Walker's phone, smashed but glowing faintly. A single bar of service blinked. He opened the camera. If he couldn't fight back, he could record. He could make the truth visible again. As the men approached, Marcus raised the phone. "You can erase footage," he whispered to himself, "but not me." The first man saw him. "He's alive." They lunged, but before they could reach him, flashing lights flooded the street. Sirens wailed again, this time louder, closer, unstoppable. Dozens of vehicles swarmed in, FBI, local media, protesters spilling into the scene. The men froze, realizing it was over. Marcus stumbled out, coughing, holding the phone like a lifeline. Walker stirred behind him, blood on his forehead but breathing. "You okay, kid?" Marcus nodded weakly, voice breaking. "Not yet." Camera flashes exploded around them as reporters screamed questions. Agents pulled the attackers to the ground, shouting orders. And amid all the chaos, Marcus stood tall for the first time that day. Because he finally understood the real battle wasn't just against the men who attacked him. It was against the silence that allowed it all to happen. The truth wasn't gone. It was alive, beating inside every person watching, recording, sharing, refusing to look away. But as Walker helped him into an ambulance, a phone rang in the wrecked SUV. Unknown number. One message flashed across the screen. "This isn't over." Marcus stared at it, breath trembling, eyes burning. He didn't know who sent it. He didn't know what would come next. All he knew was that he wasn't afraid anymore. He'd survived the system. Now, he was ready to expose it. And the world was finally listening. The following days blurred into one long stretch of flashing lights, hospital rooms, and headlines. Marcus woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor, his wrists bandaged, his ribs aching with every breath. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet grief. Agent Walker sat by his bed, his arm in a sling, phone buzzing nonstop with updates. Outside his room, reporters gathered like vultures, waiting for a quote, a statement, a soundbite. But Marcus didn't want to talk. Not yet. He wasn't sure where to begin. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a headline. He was just a kid who'd wanted to buy sneakers and ended up uncovering the kind of corruption people whispered about but never proved. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost distant. "They'll just bury it, won't they?" Walker looked at him, tired but determined. Not this time. He was right. Within 48 hours, the footage Marcus recorded on that shattered phone went viral. Not just the arrest, but the attack, the SUV, the aftermath. Millions watched in disbelief as the truth unfolded frame by frame. And with every share, every comment, every angry repost, the silence that once protected the guilty began to crack. The officers involved were suspended. Investigations opened. Names surfaced, not just of those who tackled Marcus, but those who'd ordered it. The same officials tied to the illegal gun network he had exposed. For once, accountability wasn't a whisper. It was a roar. But for Marcus, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavy, like the weight of every name that never made it this far. At night, he scrolled through messages, thousands from strangers around the world. Some offered love. Some offered rage. Some just said thank you for surviving. That one hit hardest. Because survival shouldn't be something to thank someone for. It should be something every person is allowed. Weeks later, when he finally returned home, the front steps were covered with flowers, letters, and candles. Neighbors who had once watched him quietly now met his eyes with respect and shame. Denise hugged him so tight he thought she'd never let go. Her tears soaked into his shirt as she whispered, "I thought I'd lost you." He held her close, voice shaking. "You almost did." The story had changed his life, but it had also changed something bigger. Schools invited him to speak. News stations replayed his words. People marched with signs that bore not just his name, but the message his pain had ignited. Enough? For every Marcus, there were thousands whose stories ended before they began. Names turned into hashtags. Live reduced to statistics. Marcus refused to be another number. He stood on a stage one night, the lights bright, cameras rolling, crowd silent. He took a deep breath and told them the truth that lived in his bones. I used to think staying quiet kept me safe, he said. But silence doesn't protect us. It just protects the people who hurt us. The room was still. He continued, voice trembling but strong. That day, when I was on the ground, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd be another story people would talk about for a week and forget the next. But I lived, and now I know why. So I could tell you this. We can't keep waiting for someone else to save us. We have to start saving each other. Applause broke the silence, slow, then rising, like thunder. Walker stood at the back of the room, his sling gone, a small, proud smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The investigation that followed became one of the largest corruption probes in the state's history. Over a dozen officers and officials were charged, but Marcus didn't watch the trials. He didn't want to relive it. He focused instead on what came next. He started a foundation, the Bell Project, dedicated to protecting and amplifying the stories of those who never got to speak for themselves. He visited schools, told his story, and taught others how to record safely, how to speak up, how to survive in a world that sometimes seemed built to break them. And though he still had nightmares, flashes of sirens, concrete, and cold metal, he learned to turn pain into purpose. Because surviving wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his fight. Months later, Marcus returned to the place where it all began, Westbrook Mall. The glass doors reflected the same sky, the same bright signs, the same crowd pretending everything was normal. But Marcus had changed. He stood in that parking lot, eyes tracing the cracks in the pavement where his phone had once fallen, where his life had almost ended. And for the first time, he didn't feel fear. He felt clarity. This wasn't just his story. It was ours. Every headline, every protest, every tear shed for justice, they all led back to one truth that could no longer be ignored. The system doesn't fail by accident. It fails by design. And if it's designed to silence, then voices like his were meant to be the noise that breaks it apart. Marcus looked into the camera one last time, for the documentary being filmed about his case. If you're watching this, he said quietly, and you think it can't happen to you, remember this. Neither did I. I wasn't where I wasn't supposed to be. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just existing. And for some people, that was enough to make me a target. He paused, eyes burning, voice heavy but steady. But I'm still here, and as long as I am, I'll keep speaking, because silence never saved anyone. The camera held on his face, scarred but defiant. Behind him, the sun dipped low, casting gold over the parking lot that once held his pain. And in that light, the story didn't end. It transformed, from tragedy to truth, from fear to fire, because what happened to Marcus wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror, and the reflection it showed still asks the same question today. How many more will it take before we finally listen?